Okay, everybody, we're just going to get started. Sorry for the delay. Today we're going to talk about two types of foods which have become traditional foods and why and how they became these traditional foods in Judaism. Most of the time, as you know, Judaism, a lot of it revolves around food and things we eat and when we eat them and why we celebrate with the concepts of food. But this is especially so when we look at Shabbat, that many of the things that we eat on Shabbat have a reason and a purpose for them, and they have a certain tradition behind them of why we eat them. We're going to start first with the first most common food on Shabbat, which is called gefilte fish. Where does it come from, the concept of eating fish, gefilte fish, that is commonly known on Shabbos? So as we know, on Shabbos, as part of the Ten Commandments, God tells us one should sanctify the Shabbos and make it holy. As well as we're told we should guard the Shabbos and make it holy. And the two times that the Torah uses the commandment to sanctify the Shabbos, the sages learn from here that there are two obligations in Shabbos. There's one obligation which is seemingly restrictive of the type of work and methods that we do on Shabbat, which we'll get to soon. But then there is another method, another concept in Shabbos, which is to give pleasure to Shabbos, to enjoy Shabbos. It's interesting to note the difference between Shabbos and Yom Tif. On a holiday, the mitzvah is to celebrate, to be joyful, while on Shabbos, the mitzvah is to have pleasure, to enjoy on a different level. So, for example, if a person does not enjoy meat on Shabbos, he should not eat meat because that's not going to be pleasure. On the holiday, on the contrary, we are supposed to celebrate with eating meat and drinking wine. If it's pleasurable or not, that already can be debatable. But on Shabbat, one has to pleasure himself and enjoy the Shabbos. Therefore, people have a Shabbos nap. So where do we come with the concept of Shabbos? So when we talk about oneg Shabbos, pleasure on Shabbos, the Talmud says, how does a person enjoy his Shabbos? And the Talmud uses a terminology of having a cooked food of fish. A dish with beets, large fish, and heads of garlic. That was considered a very tempting dish at the time. And that could be in the times of the Talmud, with some type of delicacy. However, there's a deeper reason of why they chose fish over other foods. Number one was because fish is the most easy fish, is the easiest food item of delicacy that we can get kosher. Meaning, in order to have fish, you don't need a ritual slaughterer. You don't need to clean it of any fats. You don't need to clean it of any of the special vein which was on the side of the thigh, which we do not eat, and therefore even a kosher animal that is slaughtered kosher has to be cleaned out of the non-kosher fats or any of the fats that has to do with that thigh. Number three, we don't have to worry about in the fish itself being the prohibition of blood, the prohibition of prohibited fats, and slaughtering. So it was the easiest and simplest food item that a person can enjoy Shabbos with. So while the Torah wants us and mandates us to have pleasure on Shabbos, the sages have found a food which this food was eaten edible without any issues, without any complications. It was the easiest food for somebody to ascertain that it was kosher without any problems. There was another reason for it. Not only that, the fish is symbolic of something greater. Fish was created on the fifth day of creation, and God gave a blessing to the fish that they should multiply as the fish of the sea, meaning that you can see fish, they multiply very quickly. Fish always go in schools of fish. Fish always stick together. Not only that, fish, their life sustenance is water. The Jewish people are compared to fish, the blessing that we give, that you should be like the fish of the sea, that they should multiply and they're protected by the water. Just like water protects fish, so too God protects us with the Torah. Another thing we find about fish is that fish never close their eyes. So too we ask of God that he never closes his eyes, that he should always watch us. Another thing we find of fish, that fish do not have a bad eye, cannot affect them. Ayin haran. Nobody can have a bad eye because it's always covered by water. So too we also say about fish that we should be protected from a bad eye just like fish. So when we look at the concept of fish, and especially on Shabbos, there are multiple layers and reasons of why we have fish on Shabbos, particularly number one, for their lack of difficulty That means it's at ease for a person to eat, to get kosher wherever you are. And that, in fact, just a little tidbit on the side, why lox, so to speak, has become such a common food amongst Jewish people, or Jewish people are synonymous with bagels and lox, so to speak, because regardless where a Jew was, they were able to access lox, salmon, because that's a kosher fish. It has scales in it. In order to know that a fish is kosher, you just have to see the scales and the fish is kosher. Salmon even more so, because there's no other fish that's pink that's non-kosher. So that was even easier to find. So fish was a synonymous with Jewish people, because even in the toughest of times, even in a village where there was no shochet, or there was no rabbi, or whatever it may be, Jews were able to have fish. Besides for its symbolic and mystical esoteric reasons, for the fact that fish is symbolic of the Jewish people. It is for that reason that there is even an opinion that says that biblically one is commanded to eat fish and also to have a second course and also taste chicken or meat on Shabbat as well, to be able to show their true pleasure on Shabbos, that they're indulging in everything. If you're worried about the calories, as we mentioned many times, that on Shabbos there's no calories, because on Shabbos there is no concept of selecting. On Shabbos we have an obligation to enjoy it, a time as if it's in the time of the coming of Mashiach, where everything is automatically holy by the virtue of eating it for the purpose of a mitzvah. That in itself is holy. So it's only after Shabbos, whatever you eat, the leftovers, that's the calories. But on Shabbos you don't have to worry about it. So where does gefilte fish come from? So gefilte fish, the word gefilte means stuffed. And there are two reasons where this gefilte fish came from. Number one, it came from the fact that people economically were not always able to afford fish. Fish was a certain type of delicacy for many years, and Jews weren't able to afford it. So what they would do is they would get one fish, and then they would use the skin of the fish and fill it with carrots and eggs and potatoes and everything else. This way, they didn't have to use so much fish, and they were still able to have that mitzvah of eating fish on Shabbos. Another reason was because on Shabbos, as we mentioned, that there's a prohibition of selecting. You're not allowed to select the good from the bad from the good. You can only select the good from the bad. And the problem with eating fish is that there are bones, and you're not allowed to select the bones from the fish. So what they did was, before Shabbos, they cleaned it and they made it into a dish, into this gefilte fish balls or patties, whatever it may be. And this way, there was no issue of selection on Shabbos as well. So there was the two reasons why it became the custom of having gefilte fish on Shabbos, for these two reasons. So just to summarize, number one, the customary to eat fish on Shabbos is a way of having pleasure on the sacred day. Fish is symbolic of a state in which a spiritual failure is impossible due to the connection that is always there, that the same connection that the fish have with the water, so too Jews on Shabbat are intimately and always connected with God that we have on Shabbat, the special soul that comes to us on Shabbat. And number two, the tradition of eating gefilte fish came about after, number one, the economic benefit, and number two, circumvents any type of halachic concerns of selecting any bones from the fish on Shabbos. There's another very common food that we have on Shabbos, and anybody that's been to Chabad for any Kiddush on Shabbos, we know we have two varieties of it, depending on the Shabbos. We have a parav cholent and a meat cholent. But there is the concept of cholent. What is cholent? So cholent, for some, may be sounding like a French specialty dish, but cholent is actually, the word comes from sheyolin, that it stayed overnight. The cholent is a hot stewed dish which is served on Shabbat afternoon. What's the reason for it? Now, many people have different varieties of it. Ashkenazic Jews call it cholent. Sephardic Jews call it chamin, which means hot. And they tend to make it spicier. And also they put in chickpeas and they put in some dumplings. They keep it, some of them, even the Sephardic Jews keep it separate, like the barley in one thing and each one sectional. Ashkenazic Jews, if you know the word cholent, also comes from everything just thrown into one pot, and you mix it all together and it all tastes wonderful. But where does the particular food custom come from? And the number one where it comes from is the very fact that the Torah tells us that one should not kindle a fire in their home on Shabbat. Now, the word that one of, in fact, this is one of the only Shabbat clear prohibitions. All the other ones we derive from the building of the tabernacle. However, the Torah says you shall not cause a fire to burn in your dwellings in the place of Shabbat. When one reads this, one can read it one way, saying not to kindle the actual fire on Shabbos, or one can read it by saying that there should not be a fire at all existent on Shabbat. Well, there was a time when there were people amongst the Jewish people who were called the Karaites, according to some, the Tzedukim, the Baisusim, depending on what era, that they did not believe or they did not listen to the words of the sages. And therefore, the sages, of course, help us understand the word of law, the written law. And without the oral law, we cannot understand the written law. And with the sages interpreting the oral law, they explain to us that what it means not to kindle a fire on Shabbat means that I'm not allowed to kindle the fire. But if the fire was already kindled from before Shabbos, then there's no problem of eating it on Shabbos. For that reason, when we eat something hot on Shabbos, which was already put on the fire before Shabbos, so today we have like a crock pot that it sits in it, or a hot plate where it was kindled, where we turned it on before Shabbos, we are eating something hot purposely to show that we do believe in oral law, we do believe in the interpretation of the written law, how the rabbis understood it, thereby understanding and showing that we do not believe to that group of people that don't believe in the oral law. So we are commanded to have pleasure on Shabbat. Having pleasure means eating something hot. Generally is usually people like a hot food. It's a homey food. It's a warm food. It's called a comfort food. And eating hot food on Shabbos day demonstrates our belief in the authenticity of oral tradition, and knowing that tradition that is passed from one generation to another generation is that important that we have it from one generation to the next. Tradition is something which we value in Judaism very much so. The concepts and the teachings of Judaism that we have today, it is impossible for the human being to fathomly comprehend any piece of written law without the interpretation of tradition and oral law. And on Shabbat, when we recommit ourselves, when Shabbat is a day of holiness, as we say in the prayers, Harachamana, we ask God that the time of the coming of Mashiach is compared to the time of Shabbat, because it's a time of ultimate peace and tranquility. It is a time when we make sense between written law and oral law, a time when we make sense between soul and body, because everything we eat on Shabbat becomes part of our soul, and anything we eat generally is part of our soul. That's why it's so important, as we read in last week's Torah reading about the laws of the dietary laws, the kosher laws, as God says, Ki adam hu hanefesh, the blood is your soul. Whatever you eat becomes you. You are what you eat. And therefore, when we eat something on Shabbos, it's not just merely a food which was a custom that we had in our family, that we ate for generations and so on. There are deep understandings and traditions and esoteric explanations that tell us why we eat these foods, though it will become a custom and it's become on your Manischewitz shelf. These are the foods you'll always find gefilte fish, you find borscht, whatever it is, but they started with a certain idea and a concept, and when we have these traditions, they help us evaluate and live the traditions of our ancestors in bringing to life the reasons and the purposes of why they're done. One of the beautiful things about on Shabbos is that being that on Shabbos, everything that we do is automatically spiritually uplifted and elevated. Therefore, even by eating simple foods or just by enjoying ourselves simply, by turning off the rest of the world and turning on ourselves, being there with our family, celebrating the Shabbos, that in itself brings the beautiful peace and serenity that Shabbos has. As the words in the sages and the words in the blessings that we say about Shabbos, Shabbos is menucha. The word menucha means rest, relaxation. Some ask, what did God create on the seventh day? So we know God rested on Shabbat. But God created the concept of rest. If not for Shabbat, there wouldn't be the concept of vacation, relaxation, reinvigoration. The concept that a person works, as God tells us, for 6 days a week you're going to work, but on the seventh day you're going to rest. That God is telling us 6 days of the week, you have a job to work with the world. 6 days of the week, you have to purify and uplift. You're dealing with maybe negativity, materialism, whatever it may be. Shabbat, all of a sudden, we turn off the rest of the world. The most beautiful thing that you can have in Shabbat is when you turn off all your devices. You don't have to worry about any messages, any phones, any business activities. It's just you and God, you and your family sitting together and celebrating in absolute serenity. Nothing to worry about. The world is absolute. It's gone. All you can do is focus on you and your family and your relationship with God. This is what Shabbat is. And when we have these comfort foods, reminding us of the traditions of our sages, the traditions that our parents have done, and the reasons and the concepts behind it, they help us bring us to this idea and understanding and appreciation for what Shabbat is all about, tradition is all about, and how we and God connect even through the foods we eat. God bless you. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for listening. Sorry for the delay. Tomorrow we're back on at 1 p.m. Lunch break with the Rabbi. Talk to you soon. If anybody has any questions or comments, feel free to send them in and we'll try to address them.